You've got big projects to tackle, but your day gets swallowed up by repetitive tasks and constant inquiries. It's hard to make progress when you're stuck putting out fires. That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. Acting like an extra set of hands, you get your time back for the high-impact projects. Ready to reclaim your time? Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome back, everyone, to another wonderful episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast. I'm joined today by someone who I always kind of look to and see on LinkedIn and other places and through her content creation for just really great perspectives on kind of culture and experiences. And she has her podcast that focuses on Gen Z to kind of get that perspective. But just generally, I think somebody who cares a lot, and I've appreciated talking to on many occasions. I'm excited to have on the podcast here today to talk kind of just around like kind of higher ed, institutional kind of strategy, culture building, management, just a lot of different things around, how higher ed leaders are, how they are and how we believe they should be really forming their strategy for what I imagine will be, continuation of the turbulence that we've been experiencing since the pandemic. And now there's just any more host of things that are going to be coming up in the next years to come. So I'll kind of leave that there. But as we always do, Megan, if you want to introduce yourself briefly, kind of overview your professional background, and then we'll get into all kind of the meat of what we're going to want to talk about today.
Absolutely. Dustin, it's always great to spend time with you. And you made me sound so cool. You're like, she knows culture and cares about people. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. And I really think that I do actually do that, but it's always nice to hear from somebody else. Hi, everybody. My name is Meghan Grace. I have always kind of said I have a weird job, and as I evolve into my career, it just gets weirder, is the way that I put it. I come from a traditional background in higher ed, did the whole master's in higher ed route, worked on a college campus, and then evolved into working for a men's fraternity. People are like, that's fascinating considering you're a woman. And I was like, actually, it was one of my favorite things I've done because it exposed me to what work can look like at a national level to be able to implement good strategy and impact lives. So I got that macro look at things, which I really got a taste of it and I loved it. And seeing higher ed from like a 30,000 foot view from that angle was really fascinating. And just being connected to higher education, but at the same time, feeling a little bit tethered into a different world. And that's really where my life has felt ever since. Went back to a campus for a little while when I was doing my doctorate at Vanderbilt and had a very different look at an institution. I was working in assessment and special projects, which is like the fanciest way of saying other duties is assigned, but I loved it because I knew in life, like I was born to be a consultant, and sometimes consulting gets a bad rap, but what I love about consulting is helping people and helping organizations get to their version of better, like whatever better is. And oftentimes that involves strategy and having a really well thought out solution to a problem. And where I love merging kind of the idea of strategy is my other love, which is research and data, because there's no way that organizations, whether it's higher education or those outside of higher education, can exist without having data-informed strategy. And so like I'm the data nerd that loves to make it digestible but useful. And then saying like, now that we know what it means, let's go solve the problem around it. Let's go find a reasonable and feasible and realistic solution to the problem or the issue. And so like I look at every kind of task in my life as a little puzzle and figuring out how I can put the puzzle together. There's so many different routes of of doing that. And so today, as we sit and stand, I'm a researcher with a focus on generations as well as student life and really a lot of student voice and student experience type research. I do consulting both in more strategy focus as well as project management and special initiatives. I write, I speak. One time along the journey before Beyonce made the term cool, someone called me a Renaissance woman because I can't find a lane that I can stick to because I'm a multi-passionate person, and that bleeds over into my professional life. But I think like as I've tried to in the last few years, like distill down what it is I do is I like to sit in the ambiguity of understanding a problem with people in organizations and be the team member for a temporary amount of time to help find the solution and hopefully implement the solution. I just think that if we have a problem, we can identify it, we can fix it, and we can sustainably commit to being better so we don't experiencing that problem again. And so I guess to summarize, I'm a consultant that loves research, like loves it, loves it, but will also chat with you a little bit. I do have a podcast. It's something that I use it as informal research, but it is qualitative research in itself. So it's a bit of a summary of what I do. If I had to like really boil it down, no day is the same. That's for certain. I can't think of the last day. I had 2 days that were copy paste to the same in a row.
Well, and I think you've kind of identified sort of through lines that idea of like whether you're a free agent or working at a firm or whatever, like the application of your skill set and the way that you are being of service is like trying to guide folks towards their goals, consulting through data-driven, kind of data-informed kind of insights and analysis and everything. And yeah, I mean, that's like the idea of bringing in just like a super smart person like yourself and like, getting a perspective and then getting that perspective that is very kind of well-versed in things like it. That can be a huge game changer. And I mean, I've made this joke to you before, but just to put it into recording here for the world, the idea of like the cry-on that you would have if you're like interviewed on the TV, like, and so I feel like some people do this because of like ego would be like author, researcher, speaker, podcaster. But I mean, yeah, but it's the idea of like, I think for me, like I guess in my own extent, being kind of a podcaster, writer, and whatever else, like I guess I aspire to be as kind of polymath and multiversal, kind of things as you are. You do a lot of great work, and I think I definitely wanted to give sort of kudos and more proper tip of the hat to your podcast that focuses on Gen Z. So if you wanted to kind of, because I don't know if you actually said the name of it, if you want to say the name of it, direct people towards it. We'll link to it. We'll get people there. We'll get people listening because you've been, again, I always appreciate folks that kind of are, in it for the long haul. You've been doing that show for a good while. So just give kind of a brief description of that show and, what it's all about so folks can, check it out.
Yeah. So my podcast is #Gen Z. It launched in 2018, which like feels like a lifetime ago. And you were so critical of that. You were one of my first conversations about like, could I do this? And you were like, yeah. And so then I did it. That's just very typical of my personality. But the show is about really exploring things related to Gen Z as a culture and a cohort and the things that are shaping their world. And so it's a mix of interviewing Gen Zers, like those who represent that generation, who really have a story to tell and sharing their lived experiences, as well as sharing what I say other generations, leaders that have the ability to share insights that can positively impact and inform us on Gen Z. And so it's not just Gen Z, or sometimes I do bring in other people to share about how we can, in some cases, be more welcoming to a younger generation and construct organizations and schools and campuses to be more collaborative across generations. Like that's the ultimate goal of it all. It has been such a fun way to be able to learn about things related to Gen Z in a faster manner than, let's just say, traditionally academic research would allow me to. So there's no one stopping me from being like, I learned about this thing, blank. Let me go find a guest that I can experience it a little bit more. What I love doing is also pairing the topic with a study or research insights to kind of illuminate it. So it is that almost like a mixed methods inquiry for my academic friends out there. Every episode is mixed methods inquiry is what it feels like. And it's super fun to be able to see how research can live in these experiences and case studies of individuals. So yeah, the podcast is great. I aim for like an episode a month just because I'm in-house. I'm a one-person shop, which I'm very proud of. I do have an editor. Shout out to Leah Kramer. She's my girl because she does the one thing that I don't love doing, which is editing. But I have really been proud of the podcast and learning the skill and getting it out there and the storytelling element of it, and that people find value in it. I'm always amazed when people are like, yeah, I listened to your episode. I was like, Mom, stop. That's so embarrassing. But it's great to have people that care about the topic and kind of commit to some of the stuff we talk about.
Yeah, it's great stuff and great work. And I'm glad that I had like a piece of that journey is just sort of like a germ of sort of the catalyst to make it happen. And I think, yeah, so like, I guess just really briefly, if you want to kind of expand upon, you kind of alluded, I guess, to kind of, I guess, just feeling sort of a personal interest in this area kind of generally. So like, I guess I'll maybe kind of combine the next two things, but sort of just expanding on what kind of keeps you interested about this, maybe if it's like any anecdotes or kind of perspectives from your own experiences, and like, how do you see these things playing out in higher ed right now?
Mm-hmm. So I really was attracted to even just like generational work because really it was selfish. I just wanted to be better at my job, right? Like, but being better at my job entailed knowing my students really well. And while I knew the ones that I worked with every single day that would come to my office, like there's a large breadth of students outside of the 20 that I worked with on a daily basis or whatever it was. And so my research partner and I at the time were like, we need to know these students, and the generation changed. And we know there's a generational component to like everything. And it was just very salient to the time. And knowing your people, right, is like been the really, I would say, the common thread throughout the work that I've done, regardless of if I was like, I've had some interesting jobs where like, I had no idea that you did that, right? Like I interned with the athletic department in student athlete support, but I had to know those students and I had to know the things that were different for athletes in the student athlete identity. I had to know the things that were different for the fraternity men that I was designing programs for. And that's really where I see this like common thread of knowing your people is so critical to your strategy. And not just being like, we have an idea based on the decades of research about students and student life and student development theories that we know our students. There's a lot of times where campuses and organizations like, we know our people, we can implement this strategy and we're going to do it. And then it goes really horribly because they didn't spend the time to actually spend the time investment to knowing what their people were going through, and not just their students, but their staff members and their faculty members and their high-level administrators and their third-party service providers. Change management is difficult. And I think where I learned the lesson very early on is it doesn't take a long time to know your people, and it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it is something that makes the greatest impact when change and strategy is trying to be implemented. And I'm talking like this doesn't even need to be big changes, like small policies that feel small they can have big ripple effects or long lasting ripple effects, all because small conversations I'm putting quotes around that, small conversations or 15-minute interactions about getting a pulse check on the people didn't take place. And so I learned this lesson, again, 1 year fresh into my career, of just taking the time to get to know the people that you work with and then use that information to do good things for them and with them. Taking the information after it's been collected is oftentimes what sits in like a digital shelf and collects dust. And that really makes me sad. Like people hire lots of consultants to do all the data collection and the inquiry and develop the analysis, and it sits on a shelf to collect dust and nothing changes, which is irresponsible, right? Like irresponsible in general, but like it doesn't allow the strategy to be informed. And so when strategy goes by the wayside, oftentimes it's because it lacks the human connection, it lacks the empathy, and it lacks the due diligence of spending time with the individuals, the end users, whatever you want to phrase it as, that it's going to impact and involve, and doing that full, like, robust stakeholder analysis. And so, yeah, that's what I've always been drawn to, if I've wanted to help people solve problems, but you can't help people solve a problem unless you really know them and you know their perspective and you know the things that they need. And sometimes the problem or the solution to the problem is not as complicated as we make it out to be if we do that really important foundational work of spending time getting to know the people that we're trying to help.
Yeah, I think that's a very keen observation. And I'm sure, a lot of folks have had experiences where that has worked out better or worse. Because, like you're saying, like even just having this sort of like availability of kind of roundtable office hours, kind of just speaking tours, engaging with people around, big and small policy changes, or if cuts are happening, or, you're making a huge acquisition or something. It's like people want to just like talk about it, like, and just understand it and feel like they're heard. And, oftentimes I think people have the understanding that it's like, yeah, just because I say like, oh, I think you should do this thing, like it may not happen, but like the way that you hear it and understand why I feel that way and feel like that's valid, like it goes a long way. But I guess just to put that other part of the question in here, like, do you feel like higher ed I think any organization deals with these sort of struggles. Do you feel like higher ed experiences them more acutely, or do you feel like this moment that we're in, is kind of putting more pressure on higher ed to sort of put these sort of practices into play? Like, how do you see sort of higher ed playing into this sort of like strategy, culture, change management kind of piece? Like, is it a right now sort of thing that's making this kind of come to the top, or I guess, is it just like higher ed does better or worse about this?
I think it's been a long time coming that higher ed is now feeling the pressures of learning how to evolve and to evolve swiftly. And for a long time, and this is not a knock at higher ed, for a long time, it's been very a protected institution. I'm saying institution as like the industry of colleges and universities, because there was no competition. There was no competition in our economy. Like, we as an institute, as an environment, as an industry, we were the place you went to take that level up in your career for earnings, for happiness, for potential. In the last 15 years, that has changed. There's a reason why young people are looking at college and saying, I don't know if I want to give you tens of thousands of dollars every single year to maybe get a job, when I could take the same skills that I've learned on my own and on-ramp into a job in the tech industry where they just want to know if I can code computers. So there hasn't been the push until about like 10 to 15 years ago. And we're starting to feel the uncomfortable nature of more or less being challenged in the ability to be effective, to be efficient, to be nimble, which nimble is not a word that is oftentimes associated with institutions of higher education. I say that as someone that loves colleges and universities. Like, I love them so much. I tour them in cities when I'm traveling. Personally, I'm like, is there a college here I can walk around? Because I feel a sense of comfort there. But nimble is not the word that is often associated with institutions like that. And so I think the pressure for change management, the pressure for swift strategy execution is higher, but it is something that higher ed has not necessarily been as practiced at. And when there are changes, which change is necessary for organizations to grow and evolve, regardless of if it's higher ed or not. Change is necessary. Change isn't always a bad thing. Change can be a very good thing, but change is also a very emotionally driven thing, because there's a lot of personal pride in the work that we do. There's a lot of personal pride in the universities that we attend, that we frequent, that we root for, that we cheer on. There's a lot of pride with institutions of higher education for the most part, in a good way, but that also makes change difficult.
Hey, it's Mallory. Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event brings together leaders, innovators, and many of your favorite Enrollify creators to explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. We're packing the schedule with real examples and case studies, so you leave knowing how to harness AI to drive meaningful change at your institution. Whether you're looking to enhance student outcomes, optimize enrollment marketing, or simply stay ahead of the curve, the AI Engage Summit is your gateway to the next level of higher education innovation. Registration is free. Visit element451.com to save your spot. Now, back to the show.
The other thing that makes change difficult is this is a blanket statement. I know that not every institution is operated like this. The siloed nature of institutions of higher education. In some cases, it's the split nature of faculty and academics and everything else living in its own world. And even within an academic college, where there's the faculty members that do the education, and then there's the administrators that operate that college, that academic program. It's fascinating. And I think that it's hard to move any ship forward if you have splinters and fractures of focus. If you think about an institution or any organization as one giant team sport, you can't win the championship. You can't execute a winning season if you have members of your team that are focused on something completely different or not paying attention to the top priorities. And I think that we're seeing more push towards institutions to have that cohesive culture to have that cohesive focus on a strategic plan. I love the fact that I'm hearing more about strategic plans from institutions, but that's not always been the practice. And we're trying to come along with that. And that change is difficult. And so I think higher ed is just in this weird space right now that I hope that we can get through. I think that we can. We employ some of the brightest people in the world at our institutions. So I'm confident that we will get through it as an industry. But there's a few kind of like lingering factors at play. And it has a lot to do with like, we haven't been nimble because we haven't had to be. We have had no competition on the block of preparing young minds for the future. We operate in our own little camps in a really great way. There's some massive benefit to silos on a campus. There's also some really big drawbacks as well. And then just this idea that change is hard. And so when you have heightened levels of emotional connection to an institution or organization, change is even more difficult. And so there's three really difficult things going on, and higher ed is like being pushed into a corner to be like, get better fast. And that's just never really been our strong suit.
Yeah. I mean, I think, because I remember we talked the other day and, we centered in on this topic of like what we wanted to do this episode on. And I think like that idea of like, you see these headlines around like massive budget shortfalls and, these deficits that are trying to be closed by institutions, and that like we were talking about this sort of like incongruence. I was like, that has to be it. Like you might have this sort of like lofty vision or a strategic plan that you articulate, and then it just gathers dust on a shelf. And I think it's the idea that like the siloing, it doesn't feel like everybody's on the same team, because it's just like, well, I've got my little fiefdom here that I'm trying to protect and just do my thing. I've got this huge amount of like subject matter expertise. And like you said, there could be some benefits in that. We're doing amazing research and doing whatever, but then it's like, you don't feel like you're connected to the core mission, the core goals, and like impacting, retention and enrollment and, whatever else. So that it's like this incongruence is making these like splinters be these like massive chasms where it's like, okay, you all like, we're just going off all the way over here. You're now like an island. You're doing great, but we're like starving over here. And now we have this massive budget shortfall because you should have been kind of closer in and more plugged into like what we're trying to do strategically institution and impacting those kind of core goals and everything. And because it's like, yeah, these like $100+ million deficits don't happen overnight. It's, I think, a very long term of like not having that kind of strong visionary leader at the top. It's kind of wrangling everybody together, kind of coalescing and coalition building and, driving everybody towards, those same core goals, where I think you can get hopefully the best of both worlds of having that deep subject matter expertise and everything, and it's still everybody feeling like they're working together. Where I feel like you said, it's kind of, we're getting at a point where I feel like higher ed is unfortunately like the worst of all the worlds, of like the worst parts of siloing, kind of weak leadership, kind of revolving doors of leadership with presidents and everything. And now I think with kind of an example, I think of just sort of the difficulties of this moment and how institutions end up seeming to kind of trying to build a strategy to survive is kind of like just cutting their way to growth. It's like, well, if we remove enough fat, we have to be moving forward because we're going to get rid of all this sort of like dead weight and kind of presumably more nimble and able to move forward more quickly. But what's your thought on that? Because I feel like, from the outward sort of perception, there's all these layoffs and closures and different things happening. And it's like, well, you can't just cut your way to growth. You got to have a little bit more than that. So how do you kind of see those dynamics at play, I guess, of like, the things that are all the negatives are kind of grabbing the headlines, but I'm sure some institutions have to be trying to figure out a strategy that's going to kind of evolve them to move in kind of, more healthy place in the future.
So I think a note on just like my favorite thing, the strategic plan that gets a love-hate, like either you love them or you absolutely hate them. Like, and it depends on how you've been involved with them or have been the recipient of them, is what I have found. The schools and the institutions that do a really good job are the ones that talk to their stakeholders before the plan is made. They fully understand their stakeholders, not just like their board, right? Like they're everyone from a staff member to that is not at all student facing, that might just be payroll and doesn't see a single student, all the way through the first year students and the parents and family members, like truly does robust stakeholder understanding to inform a strategic plan. Those are the best ones that also have that external focus of what does the landscape look like. The ones that really knock it out of the park do almost an annoying amount of due diligence in making sure that all those people that were engaged in the beginning part of understanding the strategic plan or informing the strategic plan after it's created and it's implemented, they are reminded about it. And it is communicated. And it is the backbone of everything that everyone does. And it's really what it does is it keeps everyone focused on the same X amount of goals, maybe 4 or 5 goals or objectives that the strategic plan is supposed to be focusing on. I'll show a little bit of my bias because this is something that I actually see in my own alma mater, Chapman University. They've done a lot of really good stuff in growth and innovation in a lot of different ways that you wouldn't normally associate with a regional private liberal arts college. Those institutions are having a bit of a struggle bus moment, but not Chapman. And I see how, I think at least 4 times a year, and I'm on the advisory board for a College of Education, so I have a little bit of a different look at it. But outside of that, as an alumni, I get notifications that is very clear about this is our strategic plan right now. Here's what we've done to achieve X, Y, and Z in the last few months since we last talked to you. Here's our annual report, and here's what we're working on next. And that is critical. That is critical to know as an institution, this is what we're about. This is what we're prioritizing. And that helps when, you think about how do you achieve growth when you're also being told to be more efficient with funds and how to be potentially having to lay people off. It's a matter of making those financial decisions that's either in alignment or not in alignment with the strategic plan and the priorities that are included in that and the strategy if it's not a full-blown strategic plan, but the main objectives of the strategy and making sure everyone's aware of that because that changes the nature of the conversation around allocating resources. There can be 1,000 amazing ideas that come out of an institution in terms of initiatives and things to implement. But it becomes a filtering system for making decisions to determine, is this in line with our strategic plan, the plan that we all informed and agreed to implement. It allows those conversations to be taken from what can feel like a very emotional, heightened setting to, well, let's go back to the thing we all said we agreed upon. And it actually democratizes it a little bit to some degree. And so I find that institutions that stick to those priorities and make sure everyone is aware and understands their role in those priorities have the ability to grow and innovate a lot faster. And it's because there are a lot of people at institutions. And when there's a lot of people that are committed to the same things and the same ideals and the same general set of goals, the special strengths that each of those different types of people bring into that allows innovation and growth to happen a lot faster. And so you're absolutely right. You can't cut your way to growth, but you can collaborate your way towards growth. You can collaborate and you can connect people together towards growth and making sure that everyone, I always say strategic planning to any degree, whether it's a small 5-person team or an institution that has 50,000 employees, is a matter of looking at how are we all rowing the boat together? And does everyone have a place in the boat? And does that place make sense? And are they rowing in the same technique that we need to be? And are we all kind of in motion together? And that's where I think that we have a lot of conversations around strategy and innovation that fall flat because we're not putting people in the right seats and we're not making sure the people in the right seats are well supported and well informed.
Yeah, I like that line of kind of collaborate our way to growth because I think that just a good kind of succinct line to kind of summarize things because I think the way that you do that, like you said, is keeping the North Star very clear and at the forefront. And the idea of certain institutions are in those very dire financial straits, so they're having to make some tough decisions. And it could be, it's oh, well, this program has just been hemorrhaging money for some period of time. That does not serve the goal. The goal is very clear. The goal is, to cut, a certain amount to balance our budget and all that. And the idea that clearly over time, they themselves, that program leadership, the department, that, whatever, have not been able to kind of make that work. So that may be an area that we need to be more scrutinizing on. And that certainly it's, like I said, being very clear and upfront and democratic with that, it's not coming as sort of a blind side. And I think even the idea too, where it could be all right, well, maybe just try to restructure. Or it could be well, we have a lot of great, amazing comms people or marketing people or, administrators. How can we build up the capacity in other areas that are more strategically aligned than others? It's okay, you're not just straight up laying off people and being hey, good luck, thanks for, thanks for everything. And that I think is, a way to get you into a place where you're more strategically aligned, where it just feels like a much better, healthier, and maybe to some people more positive framework than just certainly, not just cutting your way to growth. Because it's I think that would be very difficult without knowing what you're doing is clearly serving very explicit goals that are at the forefront of the way that those conversations are unfolding. So just to try to kind of tie this all up put a pretty nice bow on it. Again, you've already given some amazing advice and perspectives and, a clear passion for this work. If you had to either kind of bold circle, underline something that you already said, or give a couple extra pieces of advice that you would give right now to higher ed leaders.
Oh my goodness. How could I distill that down? I'll do my best. Actually know your people. Don't think you know your people. And if you're going to say you know them, it's do your homework and your due diligence. Like you need to, in some cases, show your math on how you know them. Show how you solved for X, if you will. And so I think that for strategic leaders that want to be very strong in implementing a strategy, developing and implementing a strategy, people need to be at the forefront of that. There needs to be so much human work that's done there to feel good about and to feel confident in what's going into that. Because I think if you're on the receiving end of change, you often feel like you don't have a voice. And that's when people start to feel protective and they feel honestly like they're pushed into a corner. And so for strategic leaders, making it the number one priority to know your people and create a space where they can feel like they can have a voice and that they feel heard. For those receiving change, it sometimes is my thing to you is if you're given an opportunity to share your voice, you need to use that opportunity because you don't get to complain that they're doing it wrong if you never use your opportunity to tell them how to do it right. And so it's a two-way street, those being led and those who lead. It is a human interaction. As much as strategy feels and implementation feels very high, 30,000-foot view of things, everything that happens on the ground requires people work. And knowing your people and understanding what they need in those moments of change and those moments of change to be sustainable and having those really intentional conversations. But that is easier said than done. I think that for leaders in higher education, you have a hard job, but it's not an impossible task. It's the willingness in ourselves to continue to learn, continue to reconnect with people, and to take in more information to be informed leaders to make strong choices. And the hard part there is also making choices that might be unpopular, but as long as, again, we're showing our math of how we got there and communicating how we got there, I think it smooths that unpopularity when people disagree. So the other thing is, we didn't really get into it, but the idea that we as institutions, like we don't have to do the same thing or all the same things that the institution next door is doing. We're allowed to be an institution with our own identity and narrow in on what we as an institution are about. I don't belong to any singular institution right now, but like what we as an institution are about and being so confident in it that it's okay that we don't do the same academic program that the institution down the road does because we have our 50 programs that are absolutely stellar. And wouldn't you rather have 50 programs that are stellar than 100 that are subpar?
Yes.
I think the institutional identity, yes, as theoretically, yes, we would. But I think that there's always this trap of comparison to the institution next door and trying to keep up with the Joneses of the institution down the road, as opposed to like, this is what we are about. And people buy into what we are about when it is clear and compelling. When we are about 50, 100 things, it is so hard to feel connected to that. And that's where I want to give leaders of higher education the cheerleading, if I have to, of like, be what you are about and be about it loudly and proudly, and don't try to be the institution next door.
Those are inspirational words to end on. I agree. And I think, yeah, I mean, that almost is like one of those things where it's like, you kind of just want to let it sit with people of like, differentiation is good. Like it give you permission to like, figure out like, oh, we're really good in this. That's a, high margin program for us that students love and, all that. And we've got great kind of like amenities for that versus something that we feel like we have to like make a huge investment into to even be competitive or whatever. It's going to take too long and all of that. It's like, hey, you've already got a good thing going over here. Maybe try to like expand on that, make it even better and fund that through kind of, trimming off underperforming, programs or whatever else. But yeah, I mean, I think that's like the sobering moment I think we're in is that I think there was this sort of like, arms race in many kind of facets and different ways for institutions that they all were sort of trying to have the same or similar things. And certainly with like, physical amenities and all these kind of things, like we're increasingly in a position where, online education, hybrid education, or programs that aren't so heavily reliant on like huge physical footprints are just the ones that I think are becoming the much more in demand fields and just wiser investments. So I think that is amazing food for thought and great insights as always. Appreciate your advice and just appreciate your time. And we'll have ways to connect with you and your podcast and all the stuff you do in the description as always. But Yeah, I think this is a great thought-provoking episode, and I appreciate you partaking in it with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for letting me come on and just say 30,000 foot views. Some people hate them. I could live in the 30,000 foot view land forever, just happily up in the clouds. But it is always great to be able to kind of, if you will, nerd out about this kind of stuff. And sometimes we have a hard time picking our head up from the immediate work that we do to look at the entire landscape. So I am always thankful to be able to do that kind of stuff and converse about it.
That's what the vibe of the show is. Yeah, it's 30,000 feet geek outs. That could
I love it.
Working title for the show, but no, but
you can have that one for free. That you can have for free.
Yeah, a good tagline for the show. Good tagline for this episode for sure. So yeah, thanks again, and make sure folks connect and listen to Meghan's podcast. The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you'll like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.